welcome to Australia, Jordan.
Thank you.
Wonderful having you here. And that was an extraordinary event last night. I was privileged to MC your first talk in Australia. And looking out over that sea of young men was quite an experience. All these sort of eager faces of, and mainly male, mainly young men who clearly see you as some sort of saviour, who are, following your every word. And
well, they see me as someone who thinks they can save themselves.
Yeah, well.
But that's something, for someone to think that. Yeah.
Now, one of the things that fascinated me was that Vice interview where you talked about women wearing high heels and lipstick. And what I thought was extraordinary was the reaction of your interviewer, who was clearly gobsmacked at the idea, your concept that this had something to do with being sexually provocative. And
that was yeah. Well,
it never had occurred to him.
It was funny. Well, if we're going to regulate sexual behavior in the workplace, which we apparently are hell bent on doing, then fair enough. Where's your boundaries exactly? To what degree are we going to regulate it? And I don't mean vaguely. I mean exactly how are we going to regulate it? And so the idea that makeup is a sexual display, I just thought that was absolutely self-evident. But it's amazing what isn't self-evident. Now, that also doesn't mean that I don't think women should wear makeup in the workplace. I never said I did think that. I said that if we were going to regulate sexual behavior, that might be one of the things that falls under consideration.
But you also, I wonder whether you'd take it a step further and say we need to look at women's responsibility for their behaviour, not just how they look, but whether they choose to leave a button undone on their shirt, or whether they choose to behave in a sexually provocative way in the workplace.
Well, the boundaries aren't so clear, right?
No.
The boundary between presenting yourself attractively and presenting yourself sexually aren't crystal clear. I mean, sophisticated people know how to play exactly with the edge, I would say, right? Because the more sophisticated you are, the more you can play at edges like that. But to think it through is an absolutely daunting endeavor. Like, okay, what are the rules for how you should dress? It's like, well, you don't know the rules. Just maybe if you know how to dress, you have enough sense so that you have what would you call it? You have an implicit sense of what's appropriate and what isn't. It's part of a very well-developed sense of fashion, let's say. Try to break that down into a set of rules. It's good luck to you, man. That's impossible.
But we're also not even beginning to discuss. We're only discussing one side of the equation. We're only discussing male behaviour and male restraint and what men shouldn't do. I don't think we're discussing at all women's behaviour. And where that's abundantly clear is in the sexual consent courses that are being run in our universities, and I'm sure I assume it's happening in Canada, it's certainly happening in America, where men are required to get enthusiastic consent. Men in colleges are required to get consent every inch of the way when it comes to
affirmative consent. I know at Princeton they actually printed out flyers requesting that if you were dancing with someone that you continued to elicit affirmative consent while you were dancing.
Yeah.
Like,
can I put my hand on your bottom?
Right. Because we all know how romantic that question is.
But what's fascinating about, I've been examining those courses, and the woman is totally inert. They never ask her to. They never discuss whether she's saying yes or no clearly, whether she's aware of whether she wants to give consent during that process. And I mean, it strikes me as that's treating women as infants. That's putting all the onus on men and no responsibility for women to know their own will and then to convey that to the man. So it's very much treating women only as victims, which I don't know. Have you ever thought about that or talked about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not. The more that you regulate and protect someone, the more you disempower them. That's pretty much how it is. And I think that one rule I didn't write about in my book was don't follow stupid rules. That's a really good rule. Rule 1: don't follow stupid rules.
So we should be systematically breaking some of these rules about behaviour in the workplace.
Well, at NBC now, in the U.S., you're required to inform on colleagues who are having a romantic affair, right? And they have hugging guidelines. It's like, great. Well, the thing is, if you have hugging rules, then now you have hugging policemen, because you actually can't make rules without producing an enforcement bureaucracy. It's like, who the hell is going to serve as the hugging policeman? What sort of person is that going to be? And you really want them in your life? And you want to be surrounded by people who are going to inform on you because of your romantic behavior, messy and horrible as it is? I mean, it's not like these things are without danger, obviously. You invite the regulators in at your great peril.
Well, they're in.
So, yeah, oh yes,
so how do
I
we get them out?
That. Women. We don't know what female tyranny would look like, for example. Maybe there'd be an unbelievable regulation of male sexual behavior.
I think we see female tyranny now.
You think you see it starting?
No question.
Yeah, but I don't think we've seen the full manifestation of it yet.
Well, I think we're doing pretty well. I mean, the suffragettes in the 19th century had a slogan, "Votes for women, chastity for men." And I would argue they would be celebrating in the streets if they saw what is happening here in terms of the constraints on any expression of male sexuality.
Yeah, well, I think you put your finger on part of it, is that it's in some sense, and I'm speaking in generalizations here, but it could be a pronounced female proclivity to legislate against unwanted sexual attention Wanted sexual attention is fine, but the unwanted sexual attention should not be permitted. It would simplify things. Now, the question is how you,
Because what if you thought you wanted it at the time, or you were so drunk at the time you didn't know what you were doing, the next day you make a mistake, you realise you made a mistake and you feel bad about it. I mean, that's the sort of issue that is emerging with some of these alleged
that's part
college rapes.
That's part of the complexity of unregulated individual sexual behavior. It's like, when you say yes, do you fully say yes? Well, what do you mean fully say yes?
And you're taking responsibility for that.
Well, and what does it even mean to say fully, to say yes exactly? It's like, because it turns out that saying yes to a sexual encounter is actually an extraordinarily complicated thing. Yeah. And, are you the sort of person who says yes about things and never feels two ways about it at the same time? Well, I don't think anyone exists like that. I mean, I don't think there are people who are married who don't have this sense now and then that maybe they shouldn't have married this person. I mean, we're full of internal contradictions. Yeah. And because we're full of internal contradictions, what does affirmative consent mean?
Well, depressing. Anyway, let's talk about some cheerful things.
Okay.
I loved, in your book, I loved the section about the boys and the skateboards. And the fact that you're talking about the need for boys to take risks and to raise sons where you include that element in their lives. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Well, it's funny to think about it in terms of video games, because that's like the last preserve, I would say, in some sense, of autonomous male adolescent culture. You can go on the video games, you can play the video games with your friends, it can be an entirely competitive environment, and no one bothers you about it. It's had to be virtualized, eh? That's so interesting.
In case you fall over and
bruise your knee. Even to not be interfered with. It's had to be virtualized.
Yeah.
And so, that's too bad. No doubt about it. So.
But I mean, the funny thing is, I had two sons who play rugby. I don't know, very rough game, and it took me a while to get used to the fact that that's what that's all about as a woman. I mean, you watch these boys roughhousing, and anyway, I learned that how they loved it and how it. There were rules to control what is essentially male behaviour, that whole, interacting in that very physical way and learning and gaining mastery over their physicality and their strength in that situation. But what's happening in Australia is the rugby is being pushed out by mothers. And to me, it's very much about the shift in power in marital relationships now. I once spent a whole morning interviewing dads on a soccer field, because all the little boys are playing soccer now because mum thinks it's safer. And I said to these big beefy blokes, what's happening here? Did you used to play rugby? Oh yeah, I played rugby. But mum thinks it's better that little Johnny plays soccer because it's safer.
Yeah.
I mean, thinking back to the 1950s, there's no way dads would have allowed mums to choose what sport their son plays.
Don't underestimate the power of guilt.
Yeah.
You can use guilt as a manipulative force very, very effectively.
So
and that's really happened.
How is guilt playing out there?
Well, I think that increasingly men have been called upon to feel guilty, bad, let's say morally reprehensible about their essential nature.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful force, because most men don't actually want to be bad. So they'd rather be good. they'd rather be honorable and well regarded and all of that. And so then when they're being pilloried for their inadequacies, then, especially if that's forceful and continual, then they retreat.
So why is it bad to let your boy play a rough sport?
Well, he can get hurt.
He can get hurt.
The thing is that there's...
I told you so.
Well, yes, definitely
Look
that.
at a broken leg.
Yeah, definitely that, or your concussion for that matter.
It's true, of course.
But the problem is danger lurks everywhere, and overprotecting people is another form of catastrophe. I talk about the Hansel and Gretel story, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's a story about the devouring mother. It's like, well, the kids are lost in the woods. They're in danger. They're in mortal danger. They come across a gingerbread house. It's like, isn't that wonderful? It's shelter and candy. Well, maybe it's too good to be true. Well, inside there's a witch that wants to devour them. It's like, beware of someone who wants to do everything for you, right? They're the devouring type. And there's a rule. Then the rule is, for people in your care, do not do anything for them that they can do for themselves. Very harsh rule. But you want to foster their independence. Back off and let them take the world on step by step and expose themselves to danger while they're doing it so they can attain mastery. You want your children to be safe or competent? That's the question. And the answer is safe. That's the wrong answer, because there's no safety. That doesn't mean they should be taking, that doesn't mean that you tell your kids to go out and play on the freeway. Right? Everyone's sensible enough to know that that's a mistake. But
that's the conflict, isn't it? Because as a mother, you think, when the father throws the baby in the air and the baby's, your instinct is to not want them to do that.
Right.
Not to want them to go down the slippery slide.
Right. Even though the baby's thrilled about being thrown in the air.
Women are winning that battle.
Mm-hmm. No, yes, absolutely, no question about it. Well, they're winning in the short term. They're losing in the long term.
Are they ever going to win? And then around...
In my kids' school, you weren't allowed to pick up snow. It wasn't that you couldn't throw a snowball. You couldn't pick up snow. So I had a rule with my kids. I said, you can pick up snow. You can throw a snowball too. If you want to hit one of your idiot teachers in the back of the head with the snowball, that's actually okay with me too. But you take your punishment if you get caught.
Yeah.
So, because I thought, you can't pick up snow? It's like, sorry, you've crossed a line there, regulators. That's just too much. How can you be that? Devouring is exactly the right word. You're going to regulate children's behavior to that degree? What the hell's wrong with you? Leave them alone.
Yeah.